According to Sundar Pichai, AI is the most important thing humanity has ever worked on, more profound than even fire or electricity. Since AI is so important today, I was curious to know more about it from a technology standpoint and the kind of opportunity it presents to young professionals. To answer these questions, I called up my friend from school, Shikhar Dev Gupta, who is the founder of a tech startup, Mindkosh AI. What followed was an incredible conversation on AI and startups. Here's presenting Shikhar Dev Gupta on the Mike and Shots podcast. Hey Shikhar, welcome to the Mike and Shots podcast, man.
Thanks a lot, Divyansh. So happy to be here.
Yeah, Shikhar, I'm really excited to have you here on the episode, majorly because we have been friends since school, class 12th and 11th. I remember we had you started a lot of fun over there, DPS RK Purama school in Delhi, and since then it's been like 10, 12 years, and we've been
Yeah.
not in touch, but yeah, when we got in touch recently, I got to know that you are doing some crazy stuff in AI, and technology really excites me at a level because I'm also a computer science engineer, just like you. And but you went to the
Yeah.
US, you had some great experiences. So in this episode, we're going to essentially focus on AI and also focus on your startup, which is Mindkosh AI. So you're doing stuff where AI is playing a major role. And I would
Mhm.
like you to give a brief introduction about yourself as to what you're doing and what is Mindkosh AI, and a little background about you so that the audience who's listening gets a perspective, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, you're doing a great job with the podcast. I love your podcast. That's how I sort of refound you after a long time. I was listening to your podcast. So very
Thanks.
happy to be here.
Absolutely.
To talk about Mindcoach a little bit. So we basically do something called data annotation. And data annotation is essentially preparing data for AI systems. So AI systems, machine learning systems, they need a lot of tagged or labeled or annotated different words for it. These kind of data, and by that what I mean is, for example, if you want to, let's say, detect whether a photo is of a particular animal, then when you're training the machine learning model, as it is called, by training, what I mean is that the system is trying to learn from data, and that data essentially needs to be tagged with what it actually is. So, for example, if you have 100,000 images of animals, each image needs to be tagged by a person of what that animal is, let's say. So that's what tagging in that context means. Now that can get a little bit complicated because in certain situations you might also want to know where the animal is in the picture, and not just to know that the picture is of an animal, right? So you might also want to know how many animals are there and where they are in the image. And that's what we call object detection. So you not only find out what object is in the image, you also try to find out where it is in the image. And that is, for example, very, very useful in autonomous driving cases, where you want to, let's say, find out where a pedestrian is in your view, or where a particular car is in your view, right? And then there's so I've only been talking about images
Correct.
as a data. There's different types of data. There's speech, where, for example, Siri is a very good example. Siri or Google's voice assistants, all of these use AI, and at the very core, all of them need tagged or labeled data. In that case, for example, if you want to build a speech recognition engine for Siri, for example, you need hours and hours of speech data that has been transcribed. So somebody's listened to all of that data and written down what's in that hour of voice, right? Um, and that goes also for text, that goes for 3D data as well. So there's lots and lots of data, there's lots and lots of different modalities and all of that.
Correct.
And tagging is that process.
Got
And
it.
what we do is, so number one, we provide services. So for example, if you are a machine learning company and you have a lot of data, but maybe you don't have the resources to tag them because it takes a lot of time, then you can come to us. You basically give us your raw data and we label it for you. We have our own team of labelers. We also have contracts with a lot of freelancers and other companies. So we can basically label it for you and do the heavy lifting. Sometimes companies do have their in-house team of labelers, but they just want to
Right.
scale very quickly, or they want to do a project very quickly. Then
Correct.
they can also do that. Right. So that's the services part. And then we also build tools and sell the labeling tool that companies that have these teams internally can use to label the data.
Oh, got it.
And the exciting part in the tool is that what we are trying to do is we're trying to leverage AI to make that process of labeling quicker. So, for example, I was talking about object detection. Now imagine you have a data set of 100,000 images for an autonomous driving company, which is very common, right? And you would have all of these images of road scenes where there could be 10, 12 pedestrians in each image. There could be plenty of cars. If somebody is sitting down and drawing bounding boxes in each of them, it is very, very time consuming. And also that when there are a lot of objects, it also leads to a degradation in quality because it's very likely that people will make mistakes. There's
Yes.
no way that they're not going to make mistakes and not miss a car and not miss a pedestrian. And this discrepancy, this loss in quality is very, very important, or can affect the model very, very severely. And if your use case is as important as, say, autonomous driving, or for example, it could be medical industry for I don't know, detecting pneumonia from
Correct.
an X-ray or something like that,
Hmm.
it could be very, very problematic, right? So what we are trying to do is we are essentially creating a system where after you've given us a few examples of what your use case looks like, so let's say 30 examples of each object, so you tag, let's say, 30 of each object, we then start to learn from that, and we try to automatically detect those things for you. Now that system is not going to be 100%
Okay.
accurate, obviously,
Hmm.
but what it will do is it'll ease out your problem, because even if we can label 50% of your data, that's a lot of time and money saved. And if we can, for example,
Yeah.
signal that, let's say, this looks like you've missed something, we think that this might be something and you've missed it. So even if we might be wrong sometimes, in the cases that we are right, we're going to make a huge difference. So that's the idea behind sort of trying to what is so technically this is what is called pre-labeling, because you're sort of
Got it.
filtering whatever can be done automatically.
That's pretty awesome. But I have a few questions here. So you
Yeah.
said it takes time to label data, right? So train the machine essentially and labeling data. So
Mhm.
it may depend on case to case, but the training of the AI is a very time consuming process. Is it that the case? So it takes a lot of time, days, months even, to train an AI
So
machine.
yes, trading does take time, but what I was referring to is the time that it takes to actually label these images.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. So for example, we were working with an autonomous driving company recently, and their case was it wasn't exactly annotation. So what they needed was data curation. So to explain curation, as an example, when you are a company and you're trying to collect data, so your first stage is to collect data, right?
Correct.
You get your own data. So you
Yes.
mount a camera on top of a car, and you drive the car in different cities and different locations in different areas. Now the problem is that you're not clicking pictures, you're recording videos, right? And after you've recorded them, you're trying to extract images from them. So number one, there'll be lots and lots of images that are very, very similar to each other, because let's say you were on a red light and you were stopping there. All of the images captured within that time frame are going to be the same. They're not adding any value to your use case. There are other cases, for example, so there'll be use cases which are fairly common. So let's say daytime and other stuff, but then there'll be cases that are not so common. So for example, snowy conditions. If you are on the West Coast, snowy conditions are not very common. So for you, snowy conditions might be a rare case, right?
Correct.
Now, if you were just randomly going out there and capturing images and then just using that to train your model, you're not going to have a lot of examples of those rare use cases.
Yeah.
So what companies do is they do data curation. So they don't just randomly take images. They find a way to sort of pick and choose which images they want to train their machine learning
Right.
model on.
Yes.
And that's what they wanted us to help them out with. So we basically
Oh.
looked at 200,000 images of theirs, and we basically created a data set for them that reflected the things that they wanted to see. So that, for example, takes a lot of time. And even if you had an internal labeling team, why would you waste all of that effort and time to curate a data set, for example? So that's what I meant by time consuming stuff.
Got it. Because I gave this example from my own experience of using AI, because Google has built this AI engine called Teachable Machine, which is essentially this AI engine where you train the whole machine based on the data sets you create. You create groups of images or videos, say, for example, and then train the system, and then the system will try and recognize the objects when you put them on the camera, right? So that's when I felt the real it kind of a hurdle for me, because it took a lot of time for me to create those data sets, right? Those loads of images, right? Different sets, for example, right? My face, a book, a mobile phone, and all that. So essentially you are cutting down on that time taking process as well, in a way, right? The data labeling step. And when I heard all of this, I felt a little, what do you call, tech handicap, because I have not really trained in AI. But from a very layman perspective, I also want you to talk a little bit more about the definition of AI, the whole technology perspective of AI, so that everybody who's listening is also on the same line and can understand this better as well. So according to you, Shikhar, in very layman terms, what is AI?
So when we were taking all of these courses, there were different definitions, and they're all very technical. But I think the most broad and the most basic definition is that a system that tries to mimic or tries to simulate human cognitive functions. So stuff like problem solving, stuff like predicting what's going to happen in the future, and trying to learn from your experiences. I think these three are the three most important things. Now, this is very broad, because there is no definition of artificial intelligence, because honestly we don't really know what intelligence is, because we don't know what intelligence really is. It's hard to define what you call intelligence, because a lot of the times, and if you look at the history of AI and its development, what you'll find is at different points in history people thought they had cracked it, and then they realized that that's not the case, because what they thought really was intelligence was not really intelligence. It's much more broad than what you think it actually is. So it's very difficult to actually pinpoint what artificial intelligence is, because we don't know what intelligence is. And I think that's why a lot of confusion erupts, and people think, what can AI do and what it cannot do? Because you see all of these great things that people are doing. And then you think, okay, it's easy. Extrapolate it to 10 years, we can do this and that. But the thing is that that's not really how that works, because most of the times what people are showing you are the good examples of what their systems can do. They sort of cherry pick the results and show you that, and they don't really show you where it's failing.
Correct.
And that's the problem, that when people in the academia talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, they're talking about a very narrow definition of it. And what that means is essentially we're creating, so at this point in our history, we're creating what are called expert systems. And expert systems are systems that are designed to work in a very specific use case. So for example, a system that can detect faces is an expert system, because all it can do is detect faces. It cannot do anything else, right? And the thing is that this is an expert system, but really when the general public talks about artificial intelligence, what they're really talking about is artificial general intelligence, which is a completely separate thing, AGI. And that is a system that can essentially think on its own and decide, make decisions on its own, and learn from, let's say, a few examples and stuff like that. And in academia, that's a completely separate field. I don't think any of the research that's actually done in that area even gets covered by the media, because that's not really at a stage where you can report anything to the media. So what we see examples of really are really expert systems, and not really artificial general intelligence systems.
From that point, Shikhar, I read somewhere that even AI, you talked about that we still don't know intelligence, but when it comes to academia, we divide AI into certain, what do you call, levels, as you mentioned, right? One is the narrow based, narrow usage of AI, which is say in Google
Yeah.
search or Google
Mhm.
Maps, right? And facial recognition, as you mentioned, right? Narrow use cases of AI. And then there's AGI, which is or general
Correct.
intelligence, right? And then there's
Mhm.
another level, which is the expert level or the higher level of AI, where AI will essentially do most of the things that humans are currently doing, right? Say robots do higher level stuff, right? Which is similar
Mhm.
to what people think that Terminator movie, will replay in say 40, 50 years, and even Elon Musk believes
Yeah.
that. So we are at a level where we are currently at the lowest level, which is the narrow use cases of AI we are seeing right now in the world,
Mhm.
right? And even the press is covering
Mhm.
it. AGI is, as you mentioned, still in the experiment mode, right? And do you think in the coming 5 to 6 years we will start looking at more of AGI coming in the world? Is that the case?
I don't think so. I think we're far far away from that. Mainly
Hmm.
because I think one of the key things that we need to keep in mind is that AGI is not going to come on its own. Like it's not that we keep working on something and it'll automatically appear when you have a sufficient level of intelligence. It's now a generally accepted thing that so you were talking about Terminator. The thing about robots like Terminator is not just that they are intelligent, but
Yeah,
that they're also in some way conscious because they can make their
conscious.
own decisions, right?
Yeah,
Because they can make their own decisions, they know who they are, they're
yes.
aware of themselves. And these are two completely separate things. So in most circles it is believed that consciousness is a completely separate thing from intelligence, and it's not necessary that if you just keep developing intelligence it will automatically appear. So you will need to develop it for it to appear. It's not going to automatically appear.
Hmm.
So and I first of all, I don't think we are anywhere close to that. And second, I don't know if anybody is even working on creating a consciousness, because I don't really see what the use case for that would be. Because if you are
Correct.
developing robots, you're developing them to help you, and you don't really need them to be conscious to help you. So there's no real use case for why you would actually try to develop that. But
Hmm.
maybe some evil scientist somewhere is working on something. I don't know.
We'll come to that because I have some question over there later in the episode. But from what you just mentioned, right? Definition of AI, which is very crisp and clear, and probably let's just try and understand the whole AI landscape which is developing right now. So, as per research and reports as well, AI is going to generate a lot of jobs, right? White collar jobs and indirect jobs as well. For example, around 3.5,
Yeah.
3.6 million jobs will be created indirectly by AI. And apart from that, a lot of venture capital funding is flowing into AI, especially in the e-com healthcare spaces, right? So, can you just talk a little bit more about the opportunity in AI, especially in a country like India and even the globe as well, right? From a global perspective, we can cover the Indian perspective as well.
Yeah. I think in terms of India, there are a few interesting use cases that are developing, and I think the government of India is also trying to sort of promote that. I think the number one thing about that is traffic control, which I think can be automated to a large extent using artificial intelligence. So you can detect number plates and automatically I don't know, draw them tickets or something like that. You can so you can do a lot of things with just that in terms of controlling the traffic. There's also a new paradigm developing, which is that of land use control. So there's a lot of issues in India around the use of land and who actually owns somebody, because we don't really have a central registry of who owns what. And one of the key things to resolve that situation is to do a survey of the land. And this is commonly done in the US. It's not currently commonly done in India, but it will be in a few years. Is serving the land with a drone, and that drone
Oh,
could either have a camera, or it could be a lot of times it could be something called a lidar. Lidar is essentially an instrument that can detect the surroundings in three-dimensional space. So it doesn't just give you width and height like an image does. It also gives you the depth of each point in that image, essentially.
got it.
So
Okay.
with that, so you can have a lidar, you can have a camera, but the idea is that you survey the land and you define boundaries, or you detect boundaries in these images automatically. So that's a
Oh,
use case, for example, that's developing in India. And then you're talking about e-commerce. There's a big opportunity there. I think Lenskart maybe does something like that. I'm not
okay.
sure if they do. I think they do something like that. You can try on glasses using sort of virtual reality and artificial
Oh, nice.
intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can do similar things. So there's this company called Bonobos. I think it's in the US, but essentially what they were trying to do, I think there was a space where they were trying to let people try clothes on virtually.
Yeah.
So you could basically pick a dress and see how you would look in that dress. Right? And something like that can be done in India as well, because it's not something that is out of reach. I think it's just a matter of somebody building it.
Yes.
So there's that. I think in terms of manufacturing, there's a lot of opportunity in India as well, because India has a big manufacturing hub, and you can automate a lot of that stuff with machine learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and stuff like that. I think the autonomous driving case is I think we're still a bit far behind that, not because of the technology, but because of the infrastructure. Because I don't think we have the infrastructure ready to do that. Because I think there are companies in India that build that technology and then sell them to countries outside of India. So the problem is not people developing technology. That's already here. I think the problem is the infrastructure, because we don't have properly defined roads and stuff like that. So you need road markings, you need properly segmented sidewalks for a self-driving car or something like that to work, which we don't have, right? And other than that, I think in the medical community, I think India is doing a lot of work. I've actually talked to a few people who are doing it. So, for example, they could be trying to detect broken bones or imperfect teeth from X-rays. That's something that can be done. There's also work being done on detecting certain strains of cancer and other diseases from these. So instead of going to a doctor, you can sort of pre-filter these things to a machine learning system. So yeah, there's just lots of opportunities in India as well.
Awesome, man. So from what you just mentioned, can you just talk a little bit more about the impact? So you foresee a lot of things coming into the AI market. For example, Industry 4.0 is going to be one of the areas where AI is going to be implemented. Machine learning is going to be there, right? So right now it's 2022. Say in the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see the whole landscape changing drastically? Not in terms of just the job market, say for example, the tech market, but also the skill market or the education space changing in the 5 to 10 years. What do you think on that? What is your perspective?
I think in terms of education, talking about India, yes, I think we need to do a lot more than we are doing. Because I think if you talk to most of the machine learning people who are working in this space, they'll tell you we don't have skilled labor. There's really a dearth of people who actually know about machine learning and artificial intelligence. And another issue here is that whenever such technologies come up, there's a lot of people who try to mint money out of it by providing lectures and stuff on YouTube and stuff like that. Like that's helpful, of course it is, but there are a lot of people who don't really know what they're talking about, and they're out there giving lectures and stuff. And that's a problem, because if you are somebody who's trying to learn this, you don't know how to differentiate between a good lecture and a bad lecture.
Yes.
You don't know that, right? Yes. And I think that's where college education comes in handy, because that's a place where you can trust the teacher in some respect. So I think it's not enough for us to have virtual learning and Coursera courses and all of these things. They are helpful. They can help you build a foundation, definitely. But I think to be really crystal clear on what we're talking about, I think colleges need to do more in maybe integrating courses for machine learning and teaching people more about this stuff, so they have a ground truth or a golden source of information.
Right. So you shed light on the education bit. So, and apart from that, currently there are some job opportunities there in AI space. For example, for developers, it's there, right? I'm not 100% sure if it's there for other streams as well. Say marketing is there. Say product is definitely developing, right? In terms of AI space. So when it comes to job opportunities, right, a lot of people are skilling up as well, as you just mentioned, right? They're doing online courses, Coursera, going to colleges as well. Colleges are slowly and steadily picking up the AI space. When you could talk about private colleges, so IITs are already there. They've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
Now private colleges are picking it up, right? So in your purview, right, the job opportunity market right now, how hot is it for AI?
Oh, it's super hot. You're talking about marketing and says, yeah, I think my machine learning is entering there as well. I think it's already there in the US. There are quite a few startups that are doing stuff that are trying to automate stuff with marketing and sales. And I think a few people in India also. I was actually in touch with somebody who's trying to so they are basically trying to automate copywriting. So all of that stuff
Yeah.
you need to write for landing pages and for sending emails and marketing stuff. So they're trying to not automate that, because ultimately you'll need somebody to look at that, but they can give you ideas. They can generate ideas and topics for what you can talk about. And so that's one space, for example, in marketing and sales. And
I have an example
obviously,
there. I
yeah,
think that's you're referring to probably Pepper content is one of the. I've used it, so it's a
yeah,
amazing tool where you put in some data, you put in your keywords and one-liner description, and it gives you like hundreds of ideas for tweets,
yeah,
for polls, for YouTube videos and stuff like that. So that is one amazing use case which has definitely come up.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
go
So
on.
marketing and sales, definitely. And I think in India, I think most of the times where machine learning is currently being used is not directly to create machine learning products, but to analyze data that companies already have. So these big companies, these established companies, they can do analytics on their data and try to predict user behavior and try to find out where the opportunities lie in from their data. So that's also in some ways machine learning. But to find direct use cases, I think the thing with India is that although there are not a lot of direct machine learning based products that people can see, a lot of companies are using them internally. So, for example, one of the companies that we worked with, they actually use machine learning to parse invoices, and that's not a product that they give out to people. Like, you can't upload your invoice and get it tagged by them. They use it internally for because they get a lot of customer invoices, and they wanted to sort of automate the parsing of that. So finding out GST numbers of their vendors and addresses and where it was shipped to, what was the date, and all of that information.
When you
um
say Shikhar, when you say parsing, can you just explain parsing a bit here so that
yeah, sorry, yeah. So by parsing, what I mean is trying to figure out what a particular patch of text is. So if you have, so for example, in an invoice you can have a bunch of different text. You could have the GST number, you can have the invoice date, you can have the address of the person who it is being shipped to, you can have the billing address, you can have the name, you can have the GST in of the buyer and the receiver. You can have the stamp of the shopkeeper, you can have item description, quantity, rate, all of that. So parsing is, in a way, tagging what each of that is. So let's say if you draw a square around the amount or the total amount in words, and then you sort of tag it that this is the total amount in words. That's what I mean by parsing.
got it? Interesting. So Shikhar, you gave a very interesting perspective there. Okay, so you are working in this AI startup, right?
Mhm.
According to you, right, there are lots of AI startups coming in. For example, I've experienced them myself in the fitness space, for
Mhm.
example, right? You're doing data
Yeah.
labeling stuff here, and then in the content space as well. In
Mhm.
this overall market, from your perspective, what are the three top skills needed for a person to get, say, a job in your startup or any other startup which is focusing on AI? Three top skills, hot
I
skills.
think, okay, so before I do that, I
Yeah.
think the first thing is that even in machine learning, even as a developer, there are different jobs that you could do. So, for example, one is what you usually associated, which is model building. And by model building, I mean writing algorithms, writing the code, right? But then there's also the part where you actually put it into production. And that's also a separate use case. You can sort of call it an intersection between, let's say, a backend developer and a machine learning developer. The skills
Mm.
needed are a little bit different because you don't really need to know the algorithm side of it. And there's the there's the data scientist part of it, which kind of does a lot of a mix of everything. So they do data cleaning, they prepare your data for labeling, they also prepare the data for training, and then they do a little bit of algorithmic writing as well, and then they productionalize it as well to some extent. Now for the algorithms part, I think the most basic thing you need to do is you need to know math. a lot of math, because if you want to write the algorithms, now in a lot of use cases, you don't actually need to write the algorithms, because now we are at a stage where a lot of all of these things have already been done. You have state of the art models available for public use. So in a lot of use cases, you actually don't have to write these algorithms. But if you do want to write, if you have a special use case, or if you want to improve what's available, then you need to know math. That's number one. Then I would say, because that would fall under the category of research. So I think you need to be patient, because uh, machine learning development requires a lot of experimental work.
Yes.
Because when you're developing a model, you can write the best model, but there's still a lot of things there are a lot of parameters that you need to tune, and there's no theory, there's no solid theory as to which one will work best. There's different parameters, different sets of parameters that work on different use cases. So the only real way to know which one will work for you is to experiment a lot, and that can be frustrating a lot of the time. So I think you need patience, and then obviously you need good coding skills as well. But the first thing, I think the most foundational thing you need is good math skills. Stuff like we used to do at DPS as well. Matrices and differentiation and all. I never thought I would ever use it, but they are. If you want to do machine learning, you cannot hide from them.
My God. So calculus is very, very important, right, in mathematics.
Calculus, matrices, all of them.
Right. So you mentioned the technical part of things, right? So coding is essentially important. Any specific, what do you call, coding language which is in trend right now? So I've heard Python is there, definitely, which is the core AI. Anything else apart from that you want to highlight?
I think in terms of production, machine learning, I would say the language that is currently hot is a language called Go. And
Go. Okay.
So Go is a language that's really super fast. So it's not really useful for machine learning development, because number one, almost all of the machine learning packages and everything you'll find are in Python. So you can't really pick a new language there. Yeah. But when you're putting these models into production, I think Go, if you're starting from scratch, then I think you should try out Go definitely, because it allows you a lot of performance improvements over Python. And if you're in academia, or if you're into research and you read research papers, then MATLAB is one language that could be helpful for you, because a lot of the research do write their code in MATLAB, because it's just very quick and simple to do.
Awesome. So thank you for covering the tech side from the non-tech aspect. So you hire people from the non-tech front as well, right? Over there, what do you think is the required stuff? So coding, maths is not essentially, I don't think it's 100% required for a non-tech guy. From your perspective, when you hire, what do you look at for a non-tech guy, right? It can be marketing, it can be sales, it can be other stuff. So
I think so. From my experience, I think the only requirement is that the person should be sharp and should be able to pick up new things, because as a marketing and sales guy, you're not going to work in just one aspect. It's not like you're working today in machine learning. You'll work in machine learning throughout your life. You'll go to some other space and you'll have to learn new stuff. And with machine learning, I think most of the times, at least for sales, the thing is the people that you talk to, they're not really going to talk to you in a very technical term. So most of the times, it's not really required that you understand how it all works. What you need to do is what the product does and what the product provides and what benefits it provides you, and maybe have a little bit of understanding what actually AI ML is, because maybe you get into a conversation with somebody and then you should have something to talk about. But if you're purely talking about selling the product, then all you need to know is what the product actually does and what it provides.
And from, I think, a tool perspective, marketing automation is picking up a lot. So for marketing folks, I think if you're delving into the AI world as well, you can actually learn about marketing automation before, you can showcase your, interest in the AI space with marketing automation and stuff like that. So thanks, Shikhar, for covering that. And I'll now get to a little different sort of a space here, which is can be eccentric, because it's about Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is working on one of the use cases you mentioned, which is autonomous driving. For a long time, he made a lot of promises as well that he'll release autonomous driving by 2018, which was definitely far-fetched dream at that time. But still, they've reached some milestones there in the US. They're actually facing a lot of regulatory hurdles. But apart from that, Elon Musk is also developing something called as a Tesla bot, which is close to the AGI, which is general intelligence, which you mentioned, talked about, right? So what do you think about Elon Musk covering, coming onto the global scene and working on the AI bit? Do you think he's gonna change the world with AI, with autonomous driving and stuff like Tesla bot?
I think so. Talking about Tesla is amazing. I mean, the things it can do is pretty amazing. I think the one thing that you have to always remember when Elon Musk talks about anything is take away the time frame. So what he's talking about is almost never going to happen at the time that he's saying it will happen. But yes, the things that he's working on are absolutely going to happen sometime. Just not at the time frame that he's talking about. I think that with Tesla, I think the issue is, and I look, I'm not sure if he doesn't know about it or he just wants to create hype, and that's why he said talks about these time frames. But the thing is, in machine learning and in sort of these super important use cases, the problem is that the curve to go from point to point, if you talk about, let's say, accuracy of a machine learning system, the curve is exponential. So the time that it takes for you to get from, let's say, 50 to 90% accuracy is roughly the same it will take for you to get from 90 to 95. And then it sort of keeps exponentially going up. And the thing is that going up to 97, 98% accuracy is good enough for most use cases. For almost every use case, that's good enough. But when you're talking about a car that's driving on the road, even 99.99 is not really enough. Because if you are saying that you will get, so 99.99 means you'll get 1 out of roughly 10,000 wrong. But the thing is, if you let's say you have a camera of 25 frames per second, right? That means that every hour you'll be processing thousands and thousands of frames. So if you get a few of them wrong, that can be catastrophic. And that is the hard part to get right. That is the extremely hard part to get right. And that's why sometimes these time frames that people predict don't actually come to fruition. Because you try to extrapolate it from, okay, so we are here right now, we'll get to this in like the next 10 years, but then turns out it's far harder than that. The other problem is that of edge cases. I think I covered that when I was talking about data curation, but edge cases are cases that don't frequently happen. And the inherent problem with that is, first of all, you cannot cover every edge case possible because there are so many of them that it's impossible for you to think of every edge case that can happen. And by edge case, I mean, let's say that you built an autonomous driving car that was trained to drive on the streets of New York. No, sorry, on the roads of New York. Now, on the roads of New York, you're not going to see a deer crossing the road, right? That's not going to happen. But if you take that car to, let's say, suburbs, then it's a very likely scenario that will happen.
Yes.
So that's an edge case. And when you're collecting your data, unless you make an active effort to capture those images, those videos, your model is not going to be able to learn from that.
Correct.
And that's the problem with the regulatory hurdles, because it's very hard to convince somebody that we have covered all the edge cases and it's not going to happen in these situations and that situations. So it's a very hard problem to solve. It doesn't mean that Tesla is not pretty good at doing it. It's just that last 0.001% is very, very hard to get. But I think eventually it's going to happen. I think definitely. Now, moving about the Tesla bot, I think, number one, I think there are companies that are working on it. I think if people have looked into the space, Boston Dynamics has been working on this for quite a while. And I think, okay, so when I look, so I think he presented it at one of his, I don't know whatever it was, videos, webcast or whatever. One of his conferences, right?
Marketing shows,
Yeah, and one of the things he mentioned was that they were going to use the AI developed for Tesla for this. That's not really accurate, in the sense that those are two very separate use cases. What a robot is going to see is very different from what Tesla sees. Tesla is only going to drive on roads. A robot is going to walk in your home. Those are two very, very different scenarios. So you can't really use the same AI. What you can do is you can use the technology and the things that you've learned and the infrastructure that you've developed for that. So, for example, Tesla, I think it came out early this year. They've developed what is called a Dojo supercomputer.
Okay.
which is, I think, right now the third most powerful supercomputer in the world. I think
Wow.
third or second, something like that. And they essentially use that to train their machine learning models.
Right.
Um, and they can still use that for the robot, and they can still use the chips that they use for Tesla to do all the inferencing while the car is running. They can use those chips in the robot, but
Yes.
other than that, it's not really transferable. It's very, very different,
Hmm.
especially because with a robot, it's not just the vision that you get that you need to get right, because
Hmm.
you also need to get the motor functions right, and getting motor
Correct.
functions right is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to do. Boston Dynamics has been working on it for decades, and I think they're at a pretty good stage right now with motor functions. If you look at some of the things that they've done, and Tesla will have to develop all of that. Like the Boston Dynamics is not going to just transfer over their their IP to them, so they have to develop all of that. So it's going to take a lot of time, but eventually, yeah, I think it's going to happen. Maybe it'll take more than a decade for anything
Wow.
concrete to come
Yeah.
out of it. But yeah, I don't think anything before that can happen. Maybe there can be a prototype that he can showcase, but
Yeah.
it won't really be something that you can buy and use in your home.
But one use case which is already there, it's present now. It's the metaverse and the Web3 space, right?
Mhm.
And AI is definitely gonna play a big role, because I think when you talk about company like Meta as well, previously called
Mhm.
Facebook, uh,
Yeah,
Mark Zuckerberg recently announced that he has developed one of the most powerful supercomputers essentially to power the metaverse, and probably
yeah.
the AI which is gonna go behind that, right? So
Mhm.
do you have any idea on the implementation of AI in the metaverse space and how it's going to enhance the whole metaverse? Any perspective there?
To be fair, not a lot, but I think the one thing in that space that I can talk about is that from what I understand, the big advantage with this is that you don't have to have powerful devices for it to work, because all of the real processing will happen on, let's say, Meta's servers, not on your devices, most of it. Um, as opposed to, let's say, a self-driving car or a robot, which essentially has to be self-contained in the sense that it has to do all of the processing in-house. Uh, uh, so Metaverse does have that advantage, and I think that's why they're building a supercomputer for powering that,
Yeah.
because a central computer that works can sort of power everything and not just their computers. I think that's one advantage. Other than that, to be honest, I'm really excited to see where this goes, because I think it's such a new space that it's hard to predict what's really going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think you also mentioned. I think I was also reading something about 5G, and I
Yes.
think if you
Yes.
combine 5G and AI with the metaverse, I think something interesting could come out of that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think something which is really driving these technologies in the US and the Europe is 5G. And in
Mhm.
India, 5G is still coming in as a telecommunication technology. 4G is still prevalent, and 4G is still actually not there 100% everywhere in the country, right? So I think the adoption of AI and other tech, say edge computing, IoT as well, is really gonna spike up in the country like India when 5G comes in, right? I think that's my
Yeah,
perspective. What do you think on that?
yeah,
That's
yeah. No, absolutely. I think for India, I think compared to the, let's say, the Western countries, it's far more important for us to have technology like 5G, because we don't really have that. So our reach of the broadbands and all of these things is not as much as, let's say, in those countries. And the majority of the population in India accesses internet not through a broadband but through mobile internet services.
yeah.
So
Yes.
if you can bring 5G to a country like India, it's going to be game changing, definitely.
In fact, I've been kind of following a couple of startups in the metaverse space in India. For example, say it's called Zion. One of them is Zionverse, where they're
Mhm.
selling play to earn, building a play to earn metaverse with NFTs and all that stuff. So that's already happening in India. So I think Web3 India can be one of the major players in Web3 if we, if the regulatory hurdles are not there and the government really comes together to support this whole ecosystem, right? So Shikhar,
Yeah.
I think you provided a very amazing perspective on AI from a technical standpoint and from an expert standpoint. Right now, I'll move to the next segment where things will become a little interesting, because it's kind of a little general but still very important for people to understand your perspective on. So
Mhm.
first off, you are working at a startup, and before that you worked in a corporate, right? You had your education
Yeah.
in the US, right? Uh, what do you think about, what is your perspective on startup versus a corporate job? It can be crazy, it can be great. What's your perspective?
Yeah.
What's your perspective there?
Yeah. So I've had two jobs. One of the jobs was in the space of what you call corporate job, um, and there was lots of politics, and there were lots of machinations and all of that. And then the latest job that I had was more of a research based job, and I wouldn't say that had any of the politics and any all of that stuff. It was pretty great actually, um, because the thing with Deca is that they don't really they create a product. They mostly create technology and then sell the patents. So that means that you're basically involved in doing research and not really caring about the product. So that means that people work in a very different dimension. Like they don't really care about the timelines as much, and there's less pressure to work. So I don't think I can compare that to what the regular corporate job looks like. But my earlier job, definitely, I can, if I can compare that to a startup. I think in a startup, usually because you have so few people, the one thing that automatically goes away is the politics, in terms of people, when you're in a big company and MNC, and there's different people and at different positions, there's lots and lots of positions. A lot of the times what happens is people want to get promoted and somebody else get promoted, and if they know that person, they feel like they should have been the one to do that. And then that, I don't think, ever goes away.
Yeah.
And the only result of that is that you leave the company and you get to another place where you're offered maybe a better position or whatever. The other part of that is when you have these kind of politics, it kind of, it's difficult for a big company to implement meritocracy properly. And by meritocracy, I mean only people who are good at their job get promoted. That's
Yeah.
very difficult to do. um, and ultimately, in a few years, maybe a couple of years, you'll be fine, but ultimately it doesn't sit well with people. And the people who get promoted stay there, and the people who don't end up leaving the company. That's different from a startup, because I think in a startup, the number one thing is that, I mean, if you're doing this, I mean, there might be startups who are not doing it properly, but if for in most startups, what happens is that the lines of communication are open, because everybody knows each other, and these kind of things don't really happen because things are very open. You also know that one person is not just going to be doing one job. And if you are a manager, it's not that you're only going to do that one job. You're going to
Hmm.
do a bunch of different jobs.
Yeah.
And that, number one, gives you perspective on what the other person does, and you have more respect for them, and you don't impose unrealistic timelines. You stop doing that. If you are a manager and you've never developed, you are very likely to be giving unrealistic timelines to people, because you don't really
Yeah.
understand how development works. uh,
Exactly.
you know yeah, so you have to be in that space to be doing that, and it's just very difficult for corporates to do. I mean, if you're hiring an MBA, how, and if the MBA is not, let's say, from a BTech background or something like that, there's no way that they would have an understanding of why something can sometimes take a very long time, and sometimes it can happen really really quickly, right? So that's there. The other thing I would say about startups is that the bad thing about startups is that there's lots and lots of pressure on you,
Yeah.
because when I was working in a job, the one good thing was that when I was in at the office, I could work, and then once I was out of the office, I would switch off, and that's it. I'm not talking about work again. I don't have to think about work. That's not the case with a startup. It's like you're constantly thinking about it. Even if you try to take a day off on a Sunday or a Saturday, it's still in the back of your mind, because you can't really switch off from that.
That's
So
true.
it's like a 24/7 job. So that's the downside of it. But I think, if you were a young, just out of college person joining a startup, there is so much for you to learn. There's so much for you to learn. I mean, when we hire people, what we look for the most is whether you want to learn something new. And because what we do is we don't really define roles in the sense that you are only going to do this and you're only going to do that. Everybody's going to do everything, and that means that you learn a lot, but obviously it means you work a lot as well.
That's lots of pressure there. So, Shikhar, you
Yeah.
talked so fluidly about the startup space. This is your first startup, is it? Or have you done more startups before this?
um so when I was in DCE, I did a startup for a very very short while. I think we were were actually working on a music streaming service at the time.
Wow.
And that was a time when SoundCloud was really big and Spotify was not that big. It was like still coming up. YouTube Music was not there. I think Pandora, SoundCloud, and Spotify were the only ones. And then we met with a few investors and stuff, but stuff didn't work out for whatever reason. Then I ended up moving to Japan, and then when I came back from Japan to India, I was involved in another startup actually in Delhi for a brief period, and that was essentially, so we were trying to create a marketplace for transport services. So let's say if you're I don't know, a machine developer or something like that, and you want your stuff delivered to somebody, you don't have to talk to transport people. You can essentially get on the app, place an order, and a transport person picks up the order, makes a bid, and then you accept the bid, and then we basically handle the rest of the stuff. That ended up having a lot of problems as well. That's when after that I went to the US. So I'd say this is my third try at a startup.
Awesome. So I think since you're doing your third startup, say officially it's your first one because you've kind of completely into it right now, and you've had so much experience in startups. Tell me, say for a new founder, or say, I won't say a founder, or somebody who's dabbling in some projects, right? And they are building a product. What is this one thing they should be concerned about, right? Because people have lots of questions about their products. Should I finish the whole product and then release it? Should I be concerned about investment at first? Should I be concerned about hiring people first, right? Lots of concerns there. According to you, what is the one thing that a startup founder at the very beginning should be concerned about?
I think it depends on the product. I think if you are building something new that doesn't exist, then you don't need to worry about anything else and just focus on building anything that you can get out. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be good. Just something that can demonstrate what your product can do. So a very basic prototype, something that you can build in 2-3 months, something like that. If you're not doing something that's completely new, maybe you're adding a new dimension to something, but something like that still exists, then you need a polished product, because otherwise there's no reason why somebody would look at your product when they have more finished products available already. In that case, I think that's when it gets a little tricky, because you need capital to sustain that kind of development, because to create a polished product is going to take time. It's going to take more people, and all of that requires money. So you need to raise capital as well. You need to hire people as well. But yeah, it depends on what kind of product you're building.
Say, for example, somebody starting out does not have a lot of capital, does not have experience of raising capital and stuff like that, but wants to build a product. Should they drop the idea because they don't have enough support, or they're not experienced with hiring? It's a different ballgame altogether, right? Because for me personally as well, I've been running this channel. It's more like a startup now for me, because I'm hiring folks as interns, right? Hiring graphic designers, writers, editors, right? So and a lot of people quit at a point, after a point, say 6 months or 1 year, right? So from my perspective as well, it's very important to be clear about your vision as well, right? You have a vision statement, then you have a mission statement as well, and stuff like that. So you should be very much clear about that. Completely my perspective. And also happens that when people fail at a startup, right, they completely quit, right? They just give up on their dreams and stuff like that. Really happens. So at what point do you think one should give up on their idea? As in, not talking about timelines, but generally speaking, when you're building something, at what time should one consider taking it to the next level, or just shelving it? Have any perspective on that?
I think it's interesting, because like I was listening to a podcast, and I think the founder of this company called Bonobos, I think what he said was, most startups don't fail because their product doesn't sell. They fail because their founders quit. And that's very true. If you can just keep the lights on and you can just keep going, chances are you'll end up doing something. Because the thing is, people often look at the success stories and think, oh, I'll do something and it'll be a success next year. It doesn't work like that. It takes years and years to build a good startup for the majority of the good, successful startups. There are few cases where companies overnight become a unicorn and stuff like that, but those are exceptions. That doesn't really happen. So you need commitment, and you need to be you have to keep this in mind that things are not going to get better within the next year or the next couple of years. You have to be in for the long haul. Now, having said that, of course there are some times when maybe the thing that you're working on is just, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, I think. For that, if you're building a new product, as I mentioned, if you're doing
Yes.
something that doesn't really exist, if you're doing true innovation, then I think you should build a prototype pretty quickly, and then send it to as many people as possible and share it with people. Don't care about selling it.
Yeah.
Just take people's perspective and figure out if people actually think this is a good idea. And if anybody is actually interested in buying it. And the other thing is, if you ask people if this is a good idea, they'll probably say yes. But if you talk to people who are going to buy it, if you try to sell it to them, and they are interested, not right now, but they say, okay, if you add this, add that, this might be something interesting, then I think you can take hint from that and move on. But if you don't get any traction, I think that's you don't necessarily have to quit, but I think you have to pivot at that point.
Pivot. Yeah.
You have to find something that that maybe separates you from what already exists, or because sometimes you might have an idea that's good, but you don't really have the infrastructure to support that, or maybe the market is not ready for that. It could be a bunch of different things, and it's impossible to predict
Got
when
it.
you start out. The only way is to just build it and share it with people and see what they say.
So, and very interesting aspect which I wanted to cover is that a lot of folks here have started believing the fact that startups have a lot of money, बहुत पैसा कमाएंगे,
Yeah.
as founders also, as as employees also. And recently I've discovered that a lot of folks who are working on startups don't really work for just the money aspect. Money is, somebody also said that if you really want to work in a startup, don't think about money, right? I'm not sure how true that is, because getting money, earning money in a startup, and getting those revenue and profit stuff comes after a long time, right? So from your perspective, if somebody is, say, starting out on building a new product or a company or joining a startup, should they think about money at all or not at all? Because it's a very different ballgame from a corporate job.
I think if you're joining a startup, you're taking up a job. I think, of course, money is important, but I think especially if you're starting out, if maybe you're 1 or 2 years or 3 years out of college, I don't think you should think about money at all, because it doesn't matter at that point. What's really important for you is to build up a profile and to learn as much as possible, and that is not going to happen at a big company. It's just not. You might get a good position, you might get good money, but you'll probably be stuck there for a very long time, and you'll not really be working on interesting things. So I think the first few years should be reserved for learning new things. That doesn't mean you don't get paid, of course, but
Yeah.
If you have the option of choosing between a company that pays more versus a company that pays less but gives you more responsibility, you should definitely choose the one with more responsibility.
Interesting there. And from that, I wanted to ask you a personal question. Why did you dive into the startup space? What's your perspective there?
So, to be very honest, I always wanted to do a startup ever since I was in college. That was the only thing in my mind. My first startup didn't really pan out, and I had the job offer. So I took the job, and while I was working there, I was still exploring opportunities there. Actually, when I was in Tokyo, I was still exploring opportunities. I was talking to startups, and um, there were some interesting things happening there as well, but nothing really panned out. And then I think that's the time when I really started to get more interested in AI, in machine learning. And I thought that I think back then there weren't as many courses and lectures and stuff online as it is now. So back then, I think I thought it would be best if I learn more about this and then try to do something with it. And that's when I sort of tried for masters in the US. Even after I did my masters, I wasn't really sure if I was going to do it, because I think the thing is, when you get at a certain age and you're comfortable in a job, and if you like, I liked my job. I didn't quit my job because I didn't like it. And I liked my job. I was happy, comfortable.
Yeah.
Uh, But I don't know. I think sometimes people who want to do this kind of entrepreneurship, they have a different thinking. They don't like doing a day-to-day job. It's not about whether the job is good or bad. It's more about it's just not something for you, right? So that's more of why
I'll
I
tell you
did it.
why. I have one perspective here as to why we don't enjoy corporate jobs, or founders don't enjoy, is that when you're building a startup, you're essentially creating something, right? And you don't get
Right.
to create that thing in a corporate, setup. You may be creating some, product within that company or something like that, working on
Yeah.
that. But when you're doing your own thing, you're working on your own creation. I think that is one of the main things which drives founders, the conviction to build your own thing. It can be
Yeah.
a channel, it can be a podcast, it can be your Mindkosh AI, something like that, a product, a
Yeah.
service, but it's essentially your creation. And that is
Exactly.
something which that really drives founders to build products. Not money, not failure, not success, but creation.
Yeah.
That's what I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think seeing something that didn't exist before, now people are looking at it and using it. That in itself gives you a lot of thrill.
Yes.
And for me, I think it's not. I really like building teams and organizations. Like when I was working as a job, I would always look at people and think, oh, how is he handling this situation? How are they handling these situations? Somebody is not happy. How are they handling that? How would I handle it? What would we do to have a more balanced, a more fun place to work at? And I like doing that. Like I like creating a place where people like having fun and work, and also get to create something that they can associate themselves with.
So you essentially saying you like to build great cultures and you also believe in good leadership. So
Yes, very very aptly put.
and that's also true because I follow a lot of influencers. For example, Naval Ravikant, the founder of Angel List. I follow him
Mhm.
very closely. He's a Twitter influencer now. And if you look at his quotes, right, he's a very, believes in the fact that you should be anonymous and wealthy and not, poor and famous and stuff like that. So that's,
Mm.
and you, kind of are going in that direction of Naval Ravikant as well. So yeah, that's very interesting. And one more thing I want to ask you here is that you've done your graduation from Delhi College of Engineering, which is DC, right?
Mhm.
And then you
Yeah.
went to Rutgers University in the US, right? And
Mhm.
there might be a marked difference in the way education space is there in Rutgers and there in DC. Probably India's kind of getting there. But what is the
Mhm.
one or two, three marked differences you saw in the education space that kind of brought you here, right, at this level?
Yeah. I first of all, I love Delhi College. Like I love that college. I still love it. And I think the one thing that I really loved about it was the freedom that you got. I never really studied there, to be very honest with you. So my perspective might be skewed compared to somebody who actually did study and worked hard on the stuff that they learned. But I think the one thing I think there's not a lot of difference, I would say. But I think the one thing that I would say is that people over there. So I think there's two differences maybe. One is cultural, which is that over there people who do engineering actually want to do engineering because it's not a default thing for people to do. It's not like I have nothing to do, I'll do engineering. So
Correct.
people who do engineering actually do engineering, and what that translates into is that people have a lot of energy when they're in class because they actually want to
Hmm.
do that, and they work hard at it. Like when I was in college, again, I'd say it from a perspective who did not study, but there was not really a need to study because you'd
Yeah.
still get pretty good grades even if you studied maybe let's
Yeah.
say a
Yeah.
week before the exam. That's not really the case there because everybody studies. So if you don't study, you'll be left behind, and there's relative grading, right? So everybody studies, everybody works hard, so it's you can't really afford to be left behind. The other part is that there the focus is a little bit more research focused as compared to, let's say, India, because in most of the good colleges, in most colleges, in every field, in every science, computer science or whatever, there's at least a couple of professors who are actively working in the research field in that area. And
Right.
that means that you have an avenue of pursuing research in that area even if you're an undergrad. You don't have to, but you have the opportunity to do that, and that is very
Hmm.
inspiring because you see people doing new things, and that sort of inspires you. I don't think that exists in India in terms of the research. I think that's where we lag
Yeah.
behind. not just in education institutes but everywhere. But I think because educational institutes drive the R&D of a country, because they
Correct.
produce the people who sort of create the theory and all of that. So I think that's where we lack a little bit, because when I was doing my master's, for example, I think you mentioned Neuralink once when you're talking about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
We were actually involved with a lab that was working on something similar. Like Neuralink is a chip that's embedded inside the brain, but you can do the same thing by attaching electrodes to the scalp of the human brain.
Right.
So let's say you shave your head and you put electrodes at the top of your head. You can do something similar. Obviously, the thing with Neuralink is that it's inside the head, so the signals that it can get are just completely different from what you get from top of the head.
Yes.
But the idea is still the same, that you try to sort of get the signals coming out of the brain and try to decode them. And we were working on that. And that's when you work on that, it's very inspiring, because you really want to study it, and then you get a new perspective and you get new inspiration for why you should study what you're studying, because you can see what you're studying at will actually be used in. So that's I think a big difference.
What I see is that from the whole answer you gave, common thread I found is that people are very curious there, because they see a lot of stuff happening in the tech space. Probably that's also happening in India, but it's not visible to a lot of folks over here, right? Probably, and still we are at the nascent stage of doing that. But probably India is going to get there, because we are the third biggest startup hub across the globe now. So, and with you also contributing from Mindkosh AI, we'll definitely get there. So great.
We've done a bit of India bashing. I do want to add one thing so we've been talking about why India doesn't have this. I think the reason we don't have this kind of culture in India is because we are essentially still a poor country. We have to remember that we're still a poor country. And the thing is, most people get into engineering not because they're curious, not because they want to do something, but just to earn money. And that's totally understandable. When you don't have money, that's the one thing that you want. And
exactly.
So I think it'll improve as we get more and more wealthy. So I think all of these things will automatically change when we get more wealthy.
I think I'm very positive about the whole India narrative now, along with you, because you're also developing for India, and India, probably you're also catering to the other countries as well, other markets, but developing from India and for the world. That's the motto. And on that note, I think it was a great conversation, man. I think I enjoyed it a lot with you, Shikhar, and had some great perspective on AI, on startups, and other things as well in general. So great talking to you, Shikhar, man.
Absolutely. So happy talking to you. Been wanting to talk about this stuff for such a long time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And thank you for joining the podcast, yaar. And hope you take care, and I'll see you soon, man. Thank you.
See you soon, man. Thank you.
Thanks.